Hello everyone, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. Within it, I just want to go through the 5 phases of natural language processing, especially with recent developments within this field and seeing the popularization of the use of large language models such as GPT-3. I think it's important to also understand what are the different phases that this technology goes through in order to do what programs like ChatGPT do, which is mimicking human language generation. So hopefully this is a very useful and insightful content, and yeah, let's get into it. Before we begin, I just want to say that this article has been created in collaboration with Oncrawl. So you'll see below the full article written for Oncrawl's blog. I absolutely super highly recommend Oncrawl, especially at an enterprise level as a software. And also if you ever have the chance to collaborate with their team, they're absolutely amazing. Highly recommend it. Definitely check out the full article on Oncrawl's blog. Language processing is commonly referred to NLP for short. This is a subset of artificial intelligence research, and it is concerned with machine learning modeling tasks, which give computer programs the ability to understand human language, both written and spoken. So it is not only concerned with processing, however, as recently we have seen developments in the field, specifically introduction of large language models, which have been in development for quite a long time now, but quite recently are being introduced at mass, so to speak. So with the popularization of such models, we are also seeing a sharp rise in natural language generation as well, which essentially is the mimicking of speaking or understanding language. So essentially, stripping it all back, we want to see what are the 5 phases of the generation of compiler programs. So compiler programs are programs that are concerned with giving a machine the ability to decode a high-level language, such as a human language, into a low-level language. So it is a subset of software engineering, and these are the 5 phases that make up this video. So the first one is lexical and morphological analysis. So this essentially, in very simple terms, means word structure analysis. The lexicon is essentially the collection of words and phrases in a language, and analyzing this collection is the process of splitting down a certain text into its smaller components. Typically, whenever you're doing this analysis, you can decide what these components are. Essentially, as a user, you get to set the parameters of lexical analysis, which means breaking the text down into words, paragraphs, phrases, and so forth. Morphological analysis is a little bit different than that, but very similar in the sense of you are identifying certain parts of language. A morphological analysis is the identification of basic morphemes within the language. And a morpheme is essentially the smallest component of a given word that carries meaning. So these can be free morphemes, essentially words or parts of the words that carry meaning on their own, or they can be bound morphemes, morphemes that require their attachment to another word in order to express meaning. Whenever you are doing this type of analysis, you get a lot of insights about the text that is being analyzed. Obviously, these insights on their own are not something that you can use as a strategy, but it is definitely useful to have this sort of analysis performed in several different SEO projects that you are working on. So one particular project where this analysis could be useful is when you are doing on-page analysis. So you can do that to understand whether you're keyword stuffing particular morphemes, maybe understanding whether you are touching up on everything that you want to by doing a lexical analysis and comparing that to, for instance, how users are searching for those terms. And of course, you can do lexical and morphological analysis on SERPs as well. So analyzing the different titles, meta descriptions, or even the content that is ranking for your target keywords as a starting point in terms of understanding what are the different topics that are being covered, what are the different words that are being used, and so forth. Another very useful project where you can implement this type of analysis is when you're doing keyword research. It would be important for you to understand what are the different expressions that people are using to talk about certain terms, and then, of course, connecting that to a content strategy as well. Within the context of keyword research, it might be useful as well to know how users are searching and finding your content. So here, if you have access to first-party data, like for instance, Google Search Console, if that can be classified as such, then you can incorporate that in that stage as well, just doing morphological analysis on this type of. Of course, morphological analysis can also be applied in translation projects, in international SEO, or in transcription projects where you are trying to do content repurposing of, let's say, your video content. So in terms of tools that you can use to perform this type of analysis, there is a lot of different types of libraries and tools. Very popular libraries in Python that I found were Spacy, Polyglot, and Pycharm. Now, the second step of natural language processing and compiler design is syntax analysis. Otherwise, this is referred to as parsing. So this is a process of checking for grammar and checking for word arrangement, overall identifying the relationships between different words and, of course, whether those relationships make sense in the context of that particular sentence that is being examined. And as part of the process, there is a visualization that is built, which is referred to as the parsing tree. There are different ways and methodologies for this parsing tree to be built, but it essentially involves the different relationships between the parts of the sentence, and there is checks that are done as part of the analysis that show whether those structures make sense, considering the words and the meaning that they carry, or whether they don't make sense when constructed in the sentence that is being analyzed. As part of this analysis, there is also part of speech tagging. So essentially just making sure that the words, let's say they're nouns or adverbs that are being used, are actually the ones that would making sense or not. In terms of SEO work, you can benefit from syntax analysis in two different types of projects. The first one is when you are doing programmatic SEO or you are generating at scale certain components of pages, and programmatic could involve working with templated content at scale or even using a generative model in order to create your content. It's important to know whether your produced content makes sense, especially when you're using such an approach, like a semi-automated approach. Another area in SEO where you can benefit from this type of analysis is semantic analysis. Semantic analysis is essentially uncovering the relationships between entities that are recognized in the content. Another different area where you can benefit here is when you are doing translation, just making sure that whenever this is semi-automated, just making sure that the translated content makes sense in the new language as well. In terms of tools that you can use, I will link below a very useful article by Gabriele Tomasetti about parsing in Python, where essentially they go through the different tools and libraries that you can use. But one very useful approach for SEOs that has not been referenced in our article is Google's Natural Language API, which has a model for syntax analysis. And so within the documentation of Google, they explain that most natural language models analyze what the text is about, whereas the analyze syntax method also inspects the structure of language itself and whether that makes sense. So it breaks up the given text into a series of sentences and tokens, which are typically the words, and then provides linguistic information about these tokens. What is very good about any technology that Google releases is that they have very good documentation. So specifically the natural language API that Google has has a lot of different applications in SEO and documentation that allows for everyone, regardless of their level of coding experience or even just understanding about how to work with APIs, for them to implement this technology. So definitely go check it out. The third phase of natural language processing is semantic analysis. So this is analysis that is performed to understand the meaning of a statement. So this is focused on uncovering the definition of certain terms, phrases, sentences, and identifying whether how these words or sentences or phrases are organized in the sentence makes sense semantically. So here we're moving a little bit away from just looking at grammar, structure, and word organization. We are trying to uncover the meaning behind certain terms that are used, the entities, and as part of that, we're also uncovering semantic information that is being carried in the way that those terms or sentences are being organized in the text. We are mapping out the syntactic structure. We're checking for logics expressed in the different entities and their relationships. And because of that, there are some important checks that are being done to ensure that the text sounds normal or human.
Because you're human, and I was human. I am human still.
So semantic analysis has a few different important functions. First one is to check whether all of the data types are used in a way that's consistent with their definition. This includes entities that are mentioned, words, grammar structure in the previous step, and so forth. The next check or function of this type of analysis is to ensure that the flow of text is consistent. Within this analysis, there is also identification of synonyms, antonyms, homonyms, and other lexical items. There's overall word disambiguation, so understanding whether every word that is used and the way that it is used makes sense for that particular sentence, and also extracting the relationship between the different entities that are mentioned within the text. So as you can imagine, this is a little bit more complex than the typical word check tasks that were described in the previous phases. So this means that there is even more applications of this type of analysis in SEO. So here are some examples, and some of these I've previously talked about in other videos. So the first one is topic modeling and classification. This can be particularly useful when you're doing analysis of a very large website and you're just trying to find out where, first of all, the content gaps are, second of all, how you can better link pages together, and just understanding how the different content pieces that are independently standing at the time of analysis can be better connected to express some sort of topic authority, or to just have a better user experience for the user who is navigating between the different content pieces. So the second thing that you can do with semantic analysis for SEO is to perform entity analysis, to perform sentiment analysis, and also classification of search intent. I have another very, I was going to say intense video, but it's an in-depth video on this topic, specifically that kind of process that I presented at Brighton SEO, which you should definitely check out if you want to learn more about this. But in a short summary, you can present sentiment analysis as part of your SEO strategy, specifically when you're doing online reputation management, or when you are dealing with brand authority content, or analyzing user reviews, when you're doing business local management, and just making sure that everything that is being said about your brand is aligned with what your strategy is. You can also do entity identification when you are doing internal linking work, on-page analysis, when you're doing topic modeling, and you can also incorporate both of these things, as well as intent classification, when you're doing competitor research as well. So for tasks such as SERP analysis or keyword-based competitor analysis, you can also incorporate all of these. Analysis in natural language processing is also something that a lot of enterprise-level organizations can do with their first-party collected data. Even if you are a small business, there is still the potential for you to gain insights from the data that you collect directly from your users. As long as this data is held in a digital format somehow, you can extract meaning from it. And by that, I mean analyzing things like comments that users have left on your social media profiles, reviews that they have left, feedback forms, any sort of data that you're collecting as a business. You can perform entity analysis and semantic analysis of, and you can also start classifying intent to understand exactly what your users are saying at each step of their user journey with your brand. So in terms of some tools that you can do to perform semantic analysis for topic modeling, I have previously spoken about multiple ways of doing this in Python, but if you are a beginner, I highly recommend using Cornell's LDA analysis web application. And I'm also going to link a tutorial on how to use that very easily to analyze your website's content. In terms of entity sentiment and intent classification work, I highly recommend Google's Natural Language API, as it has different models on entity identification, entity sentiment analysis, or otherwise just understanding the sentiment with which different entities are mentioned, and also sentiment analysis overall when looking at a particular piece of text. All of these have code that can be used in Python, JavaScript, any language that you can think of. And they also have tutorials for using this in Google Sheets, for instance, just channeling that as a formula. So definitely very beginner friendly, and you can get started pretty easily with that. Going back to the discussion about the phases of NLP, the fourth phase is discourse integration. So discourse integration essentially means contextualization. That is the analysis and identification of the larger context in any small part of natural language. So whether that's a phrase, a word, or a sentence. So during this phase, it's important for the machines to understand whether the entities that are being mentioned are mentioned within the appropriate context, dependent on the use of that entity. So here we are not only considering sentence structure and semantics, but we're also considering the way that words or phrases are being used in order to make up a sentence. And so some very common tasks that can be performed as part of this phase include extracting information, analyzing conversations, text summarization, and discourse analysis. So this phase is a little bit more complicated than others. And so as part of this phase, programs are being trained to understand the expressed motivations behind the text and the underlying meaning of a text, understand the relationships between entities and topics mentioned and how those intersect with one another, and also understand the social and historical context of the entities that are being mentioned and whether that makes sense within that particular sentence. When you're thinking about your SEO work, there are definitely multiple ways that you can do this type of analysis and incorporate that into your processes. So the first is just to analyze a text and see whether there is coherency in the text that you're analyzing, because at a sentence level, you can have appropriate word usage. At a grammar level, the sentences could make sense. Then you can also apply additional analysis to extract entities and sentiment. But until you reach the fourth phase, you might not understand whether the text that is being generated makes sense. So it's important to, especially when you're doing programmatic SEO or when you're doing language generation work, it's important to have an analysis done to ensure that the sentences, the structure makes sense, and the way that everything is constructed is aligned with what is needed. So specifically for tasks when you're doing automated translation, transcription, essentially anything that involves programmatic building of text, whether it is from one original source to another language, or whether it is video to text, or whether it is based on a prompt and there is a language generating model working in the background. It's important to have that step involved in checking that everything is as expected. I also wanted to mention that there are some research efforts into incorporating discourse analysis systems for detecting things like hate speech. So within the SEO space, this can be very important when you have a forum or when you are moderating a comment section. Within the social media marketing space, this could be very important when you're moderating web chats or Discord servers or anything like that. And essentially, this involves uncovering the intention behind the text by aligning the expression that is being used with the meaning. And this work is being done whenever an API or kind of model that you are channeling in order to perform this analysis has been trained on a very large corpus of data in order to understand how the construction of language is used aligned with an intention. So theoretically, discourse analysis can also be used for modeling of user search intent or purchase intent and detecting such a notion in texts that are being analyzed. So one very popular way to do discourse integration and discourse analysis is through Google's Perspective API. So this is an API that is developed with the aim of helping content moderators host better conversations online. According to the description of the API on the website, it does discourse analysis by analyzing a string of text and predicting the perceived impact that it might have on a conversation. So detecting whether it contains hate speech, whether it is combative, or whether it is positive. You can try the Perspective API for free online as well. And you can also incorporate that quite easily into your website to have additional prompts for users before they leave a comment that is hateful, or just automatically flagging content as hateful or disruptive to the online conversation. Finally, the fifth step of natural language processing is pragmatic analysis. As the final stage, pragmatic analysis involves the extrapolation and it incorporates learnings from all other phases that precede this final phase. It involves also extracting meaning from the language and translating a text or just converting the meaning that it extracts into new language that is being generated. So some of the complexities that are being introduced as part of this phase include information extraction, such as enabling advanced textual understanding functions, such as question answering. It also involves extraction of meanings, where programs could break down definitions and documentation, let's say, into a more accessible language. So in otherwise, that's kind of like what we would perceive as text transformation. And it also involves understanding the meanings of words and context in which those words are used, which enables very conversational function between a system, a model, and a human. So for instance, a chatbot. And pragmatic analysis has by far the most widespread implications for usage in SEO projects. It can be used in a very straightforward way in programmatic SEO and automated content generation. This type of analysis can also be used for generating FAQ sections for products based on, let's say, product descriptions or different documentation that you have related to a digital product or service. It can also be used for automatically generating questions for frequently asked questions sections, however they pertain to a particular web page. And so this means that just any task that you can think of that involves parsing through a text, understanding what it's about, and rephrasing it or transforming it into something that is, let's say, either more complex or easier to understand, or even just a smaller character, or expanding it into longer definition. Any task like this that relates to SEO can be a particular subject for pragmatic analysis. And in terms of the tools that you can use for this, a very popular one as of recently is OpenAI's technology GPT, particularly application into the chatbot chat. Specifically, ChatGPT is developed to enable conversational interactions where use of the underlying model GPT-3 can be even more widespread into the mainstream. And this is exactly what we have seen recently within the SEO community. Because of the large data set on which the GPT-3 model has been trained, it is able to extrapolate information from the text that is being analyzed or make predictions about how to string words together in such a convincing way that it sounds like you are conversing with another human, or it sounds knowledgeable. With that said, I do want to say with a big sign of caution that there are multiple limitations of using this technology for purposes like automated content generation for SEO, especially whenever the topics that you are tackling within your website pertain to health or finance related topics, or even advanced technology or very disruptive fast-paced industries, because the language has just not been trained on such data. And even if it has, there are a ton of inaccuracies that it produces as part of the output. So at worst, you might have inaccurate text that you're serving to your users. So to summarize, there are 5 phases of natural language processing expressed in the theory of compiler design programs, which are lexical and morphological analysis, syntax analysis, semantic analysis, discourse integration, and pragmatic analysis. We have discussed the different limitations of these technologies and tools and the application that you could potentially do of them within SEO. Hopefully the list of technologies are enough to get you started. Just know that there is a ton of different technologies and tools that I have not mentioned in the video. So make sure that you research the most appropriate tool for your particular project. And yeah, happy coding and happy working in NLP. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks so much for Oncrawl for allowing me to do this collaboration with them. Oncrawl's article will be linked below. So please go check it out, and give a shout out to on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever else if you found this article useful. Thank you.